Okay, so last week we did the emergency or whatever it is, the plan, recovery plan. Now we'll get there. Talk here today now about business continuity. So this should cover a number of things that you've already done, already talked about. If it will go. So the objectives. Define environmental controls. That's really something real magic, right? Environmental control, we can control the heat and humidity in a room. And that's kind of a big deal. What would be a really good way to do a denial of service attack? Well, if you turn off the air conditioner. And what if you turn off the air conditioner now? In our knock, it does get hot because we've lost the air conditioner in there. And it was kind of a pain. They brought in a portable air conditioner, so you really do have to have the cooling. And we turned off as many servers as possible to do that. But let's say that you were able to turn the air conditioning off in a data center. Have any idea how much heat they produce?
Oh,
you could probably heat my house easily.
How long do you think it would take
for them to start popping? Not long, not long, because they heat up really fast.
Half hour maybe.
Yeah, maybe, if that. Depends on whether you had any flow at all. If we just turn off the cooling. Yeah.
If they're keeping it like 60, it wouldn't take long.
Yeah.
If they're keeping it real cool, it takes a little.
Yeah, but it doesn't take long to do that. You felt those things. The components of redundancy planning. Redundancy so that if we lose a disk, something that we can continue to operate. This is where RAID comes in. This is different than backup and restore. Backup where we have an absolute separate copy of everything and we're able to restore it. List disaster recovery procedures and describe incident response procedures, things that you talked about already. So environmental controls prevent disruption, even environmental controls using fire suppression, proper shielding, and configuring HVAC systems. Fire suppression is a big deal, and they've got a nice table in there of a whole lot of different fire suppression systems, and they come up with, I think it's a Class K. We've always had A, B's, C's, and D's, and now we have a K, which is cooking oils, which is kind of a subset of B's. The thing that you really got to think about in the IT world is what kind of fire suppressant are you going to use? Electrical fire. What are we going to use in electrical fire? Clean agent. Well, that's good. What clean agent are you going to use?
Probably carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide. What's the problem with CO2? CO2 flooding is what they generally say. What's the problem with CO2 flooding? It puts the fire out, but it also puts you out. It kills you. Okay? You got the fire out. There are other agents that are probably better in a flooding situation if you have occupied space. If you have an unoccupied spaces, CO2 is just fine, but you've got to have an alarm so that people can get out, and you really need it so it doesn't activate in occupied spaces. It really becomes a dangerous thing. Fire suppression, damage inflicted as a result of fire continues to remain high. And the book's got the example of how many businesses had fires, and a high percentage of them never went back into business. Let me find this. Business continuity, let's see. Only 37% reported their organization as well prepared, 50%. I'm sorry?
Even fire suppression does so much damage.
Yeah. Oh, it does.
Water damage.
It really does. Water damage, the residual damage.
Your building still stands.
Here we go. It says that damage inflicted continues to remain high in the U.S. A victim dies every 3 hours and someone's injured every 37 minutes as a result of fire. Most victims die from smoke, toxic inhalation. Approximately 43% of businesses that had a fire never reopened, and 29% of those who did reopen failed within 3 years. So, disaster recovery plan, fire prevention, statistically is significant. important concern of the safety of employees and the business continuity. Safety of the employees, and back to the what kind of fire suppressant you're going to use. You need to protect the equipment and the people, both. And each of them have advantages and disadvantages. You notice that the fire triangle has now become a 4-part system. So we got to have fuel, oxygen, heat, and then a chemical reaction here. And in the past, I have heard this actually when they first started talking about this years ago. They called it free radicals, things that support what's going on. If you take away any of the 3 in the triangle, you're going to put the fire out. The other thing that you can do is disable the free radicals, and that's what some of the newer fire suppressants do. They don't really, some of them take away heat. What does water do? How does it stop a fire? It saturates and prevents it from burning. Really? How? What does it take away? The heat? Maybe some oxygen? Because if you have a rainstorm and you bring a piece of wet wood and put it in your fireplace, is it going to burn? Not for a while, but it will eventually. Once it gets, how does it get dry? Hot enough, because it gets dry by getting hot enough, doesn't it? So we've taken the heat away from this thing. CO2, what does it take away? CO2 takes away the oxygen. So we can do that, or we can take away the fuel, take the fuel out of the picture. That becomes a little more difficult, I think, than the oxygen starvation or cooling of it. The picture of it, we have the fire triangle. Chemical reaction is inside here, so we got oxygen, fuel, and heat in these things. Correct type of system, not only to distinguish the fire, but minimize any residual damage. What are we going to do? And they've got a couple of nice stories in here about how they use like the dry PKP, purple K powder is really what it was, to put a fire out in the computer system. And now we don't have anything because it's very corrosive. What are we going to use? What are you going to use for each of these things? Let's see, Monty's used purple K before. At least you saw the video of Forstall burning. Fires divided in 5 categories, and the table is on it's table 13 too. These are the ones they talk about. The Portland, Oregon Art Gallery, 3 automatic water sprinklers extinguished. And here we go in Art Gallery. We've got water extinguishers around. Total damage was $200,000, and of those $200,000, $190,000 was to the artwork, the residual damage that you talked about, huh? Caused by the sprinklers. Toronto piano builder, water sprinkler, got on these pianos, $1 million worth of damage. Handmade pianos. Supercomputer, this is the one that the firefighters sprayed the burning computer with dry chemicals. What's the best way to put out a Class C fire?
With a Class C extinguisher?
With a Class C extinguisher? What's the best way to put out a Class C fire? Turn off the power. If you take the power off, because what is a Class C? It's an electrical fire. If you don't have any electricity, can you have the now you may have a residual Class B or something, or probably a B because of they're usually poly, some sort of plastic around the insulation may be burning. But first of all, is right. A Class C extinguishing agent, generally that's CO2. Honestly, that's the one that's always been advertised as a thing you want to use for an electrical fire. But first thing you want to do is get the power off, because if you get the power off, then you've eliminated a lot of that stuff. What you don't want to do is what these guys did here is spray it with a dry chemical, because the dry chemicals are extremely corrosive, and I think a lot of the portables around now are actually dry chemical extinguishers. They've had some really good ones. Halon was a really cool one. It fit down here. Well, it fit down here in that you could use it in the presence of people, and it put out about any kind of fire. But apparently it damages the ozone, so it's no longer used. The classes of fires, A, B, C, D, and K. the type, the combustion of common combustibles, wood, paper, those sorts of things. And one of the things that I was always taught that I don't think they show on here is the classes of fire can be categorized by the type of smoke that they have. A Class A fire is going to be white smoke because that's going to be wood, paper, those sorts of things. A Class B fire is going to be black smoke. And if you remember, so you guys may not be old enough yet, are you? If you remember the video from the Iraq-Kuwait war when the oil wells were burning, it was just one black plume after the other. That was the oil, Class B.
Just like a tire, that's the same thing.
Just like a tire. Well, tires are made from petroleum products. Yeah. An electrical fire probably not going to have a lot of smoke. And this one, live or energized equipment, they say foam, dry, chemical, or carbon. And this book kind of, in my opinion, kind of contradicts itself because in the previous slide we said, hey, the firefighters went in here and sprayed this computer with, and what do they say here to use? Be careful which dry chemicals you use because it is corrosive and it will destroy the insides of the IT equipment. And also, even if you had an electrical switchboard, you probably wouldn't want to use that. CO2, generally considered the best agent. CO2, you got to remember, is very dangerous to human life.
You want to wear an oxygen mask.
Well, Matt, you're going to have more than a mask. You're going to have an oxygen supply of some sort, tank of some kind, or an emergency breathing device. I don't know if people still use those or not. Military bought a bunch of those because just to escape from fires, because if you're on a ship and you have a fire at sea, there's no place to go. And you either put it out or die. And if you're in a berthing compartment, they can tend to be in really odd locations. How are you going to get out of those things? What if you're trapped? What if you've got to go through a smoke-filled area? What if you're in a smoke-filled compartment kind of deal? Smoke inhalation, back to the little article at the front of the book, smoke inhalation is one of the primary agents in fire. So they have these little portable breathing devices. I think they're good for about 3 or 5 minutes, something like that, just enough to get out of the area. Those things you may want to consider too. But you got a Class C. Class D is magnesium, combustible metals, and they say dry powder or special sodium extinguishing agents. Sand also works pretty well on these. You put water on this and you're not going to have to worry about it. Yeah. Sand generally is going to work pretty well on those things. And Class K, cooking oils, and this is actually a relatively new class. It's a subcategory. I think they say in Europeans they actually say it's a subcategory of B. So we have cooking oils here, vegetable oils, fats and appliances. Special extinguisher converts the oils to non-combustible soaps, and that's the reason that they've taken this and made it its own class, because you can have a special type of suppressant for it. You probably ought to have one of these in your kitchen, shouldn't you? Because that's where most of this stuff is going to be an issue. Fire suppression, server closet room that contains the computer equipment, handheld fire extinguishers is not recommended because of the dry chemical contents. I think this is another kind of odd wording, handheld, because there are handheld CO2 extinguishers. That's what you would want to use in there. And the handheld's not a flooding system, so it's going to at least reduce the risk to you, the human. The flooding systems are the ones that really get you, where they just have a fire and they just flood the area with it, turn off the ventilation and flood the room with CO2. Say again?
How cold CO2 is.
It's very cold, yeah. It's very cold. Now that's part of what it does. It cools and takes away the oxygen supply at the same time. So it takes away 2 of the legs of the fire triangle. And if we turn the power off, we've taken away the source of the fire. Now the fuel could still be insulation burning, those sorts of things. That's what you're really putting out with the CO2, is the burning insulation. If you leave the power on these things and they're still arcing and sparking, it's just going to keep going. It's not going to stop that. But it will do the cooling, and it will put out what really is going to wind up being the residual fire. Should be integrated in the building's infrastructure. Stationary fire suppressants. Release the suppressant in the room is what they should do. And what kind of suppressant do we have in this building? Bear, look, water. That's what these things are up here. These little caps cover the sprinkler heads. Is that necessarily the best thing? Probably not, because we got a lot of electronic equipment.
Fire didn't burn, the water destroyed.
That's right. Same thing. Back to the art museum. $200,000 in damage. $190,000 of that was from water damage to the artwork. So that means that the fire actually caused $10,000 in damage.
Oh, yeah, fire caused.
Fire caused it. This is a table, and I'm not going to even try to read it to you or go through it, but the category, what we have, well, a little bit of it. Water sprinkler systems, you can have a wet pipe or a dry pipe. Depends on how quickly you need the water delivered. And what's the risk of those things leaking. In here, and I think these are actually wet pipe, probably what you would want is a dry pipe. Also, one of the issues with wet pipe is unless you drain it every once in a while, you know how nasty that water gets? So not only are you going to have the water damage from the initial sprinkling or the sprinkling, you're going to have all the other stuff that comes out. And what about stopping up the sprinkler heads? I mean, there's certainly a possibility. That's why you really do have to do maintenance on these things. Do they work? Do they need to be drained? Wet systems need to be drained every once in a while and refilled with fresh water so that you don't get those sorts of things. Because water, if you let it sit, gets pretty nasty, doesn't it? All sorts of diseases and so on in it.
How would they drain it?
You have to turn the pressure off and with a bucket, open it up and just drain the water out of it.
So when I stand up, blow the sprinklers and drain.
Yeah. Now, a building like this is going to take some time because there's a lot of sprinkler heads. Maybe what we used to use in the Navy on ships, you had sprinkler systems in all the magazines, obviously. So if anything happened in there, you would want to cool it quickly. And some of the sprinkler systems were wet and some of them were dry, depending on what that particular type of material called for. If you have magnesium, you certainly didn't want it in a place that, and you do have some of those because illuminating shells that illumination shells, what's going to be the primary thing is going to be magnesium. So if you get into things like that, you really got to kind of think about what kind of fire suppressant you have in what areas. In those generator rooms, they had CO2. You didn't want to be in there if something happened because CO2 suppressant. Actually, when I was on the gas turbine ship, we had halon in all of the gas turbine compartments, which was one that you didn't have to remove, but you couldn't put any new ones in. And it was one that if it went off, it put out just about any class of fire. And it didn't kill the people straight away like CO2 does.
If you don't care about the environment, it's about the best one.
Huh?
If you don't care about the environment, it's about the best one.
Yeah, except you can't buy it anymore. Well, there's one down here. This Fe13 system deployed initially as a chemical refrigerant. Fe13 works like the FM200 systems, a little bit above. Safer, more desirable in an area being protected has people in it. So it can be used in an area. It's something that's similar to the old halon systems. An effective fire suppressant system that can be used in the presence of life so that it doesn't really kill people. Now those are the kinds of things that you really need to think about. Now let's move on to electromagnetic shielding. You know that you can buy and we're going to talk about Faraday cages here in just a second. I guess a nice picture in there. You know you can buy a wallet that has a Faraday cage in it?
Oh, yeah.
Protect your credit card because the new credit cards are RFID. You see, I guess it was probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, NCIS was doing it. They were looking for a bad guy. and he had used a particular credit card, and they were running around the mall with a credit card reader and reading everybody's credit cards.
I saw it on the news.
Can happen.
I saw it on the news.
It can happen. Actually, one of the videos on the, I think it's in this class, either this one or the next one of the videos shows a TV station doing that. You just walk around, you just put it next to somebody's wallet, and you get their credit card information. So now you can buy a wallet that has an RFID compartment to put your credit card in so that people can't read with this credit card reader. And this guy said that he bought the reader for like $5 off of eBay. Does yours have it? Doesn't. I don't know the answer, and that's something that I don't know that they're really telling. Huh?
Can't you do paint, get paint that does something like that?
Well, there are lots of things that are out there, I think. You're talking about for shielding? I'm sure there is. I don't know that that's a fact. There apparently is, and I haven't researched it lately, so bad on me, a window film that does. It was the military had. I know that it exists. I don't know that it's available to the general public yet. It was developed for military use, but a window film that actually stops the wireless signals. And that's what we're talking about here, stopping wireless signals, electromagnetic shielding, a couple of different things that they have here. Vondeck phreaking is a form of eavesdropping in which special equipment is used to pick up telecommunication signals or data within a computer by monitoring the electromagnetic fields. The old CRTs actually sent a signal that could be received so that you could watch the desktop of somebody at a distance. And they've got the name of it in here. Tempest is what I'd always heard, because I could never remember all the words that went with Tempest. But military started with this thing. What it really is a shielded computer that doesn't, the computer itself doesn't broadcast these signals. The other issue that we have is with wireless and letting the wireless signal outside of the area that we want to keep it in. The way that we're going to do that is a Faraday cage around the building, and probably you would need to do that from ground up. If you're building like maybe, let's say you're building a U.S. embassy in the Soviet Union, you probably would want to do something like that. Of course, they put all sorts of things in there. Faraday cage, a metal enclosure that prevents the entry or escape of an electromagnetic field. Grounded fine mesh, copper screen. And then Tempest. See why I can never remember. Telecommunications electronics material protected from emanating spurious transmissions. Tempest. And what that does is basically, it's a secret U.S. government standard. Secret government standard. What they do, if you ever looked at one, what they really do is just put a lot of aluminum foil around these things to stop the signals. Anybody ever have a computer that you could tell was transmitting? I had a cheap one. I always bought cheap computers. But if you had it in the same room as the television on certain channels, it would interfere with certain channels on the television. And if you look on a computer, it says it meets an FCC standard, which says it meets an FCC standard for frequencies that it's broadcasting. So they are broadcasting information.
There's a stray in time, you get it off frequency.
Yeah, well, and that can always happen too. This one started out that way, so I don't think that was it.
I didn't know computer pick up voices in the case.
Yeah, that can be. So teeth do that sometimes too, right? I've heard those stories, but yes, all sorts of things can happen because they do broadcast some small electromagnetic signals, and that's what Tempest is about, is preventing those signals from going out. I don't think that the LCD monitors are as bad as the LCRT monitors were about, because they took a lot more power to run them. Would send more of the signals. Okay, a Faraday cage, fine wire mesh screen. You do that in your microwave, and we've had that discussion before, right? Don't you? If you look in the door of the microwave, what do you got? You got a screen. That glass is not going to keep the microwaves in. That's what the screen does. same concept here. We want to keep the wireless signals in the building or in an area. That's what the Faraday cage does. HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, regulating cooling for the data centers, and we've talked about that. If you take that away, then we're going to have some real issues. Electrostatic discharge is another one, and everybody learned that in PC upgrade, right? You've got to put the wristband on to do that. Electrostatic discharge can be dangerous, will be dangerous eventually to the electronic parts. What it does is damages the insulation of the electronic devices. It may not fail instantly. That's why they say tell you, or probably hopefully still tell you, that if you do this, you may have weakened the area around the device, and it may fail later. It may fail immediately, it may fail in 6 months, a year, whatever else. But electrostatic discharge does do damage. Consideration regarding HVAC is the location of the computer equipment outside of the data center. And this really is a big deal, because if we lose cooling, the equipment is going to become really erratic and eventually going to start going offline pretty quickly. And the servers particularly put on an awful lot of heat. If you've has anybody other than me ever been stupid enough to touch a processor while it was operating? Suckers are hot.
Yeah, they burn you.
They will burn you, huh?
Like light bulbs,
Oh, hotter than light bulbs. Yeah. Yeah, I mean they will put a blister on you.
That's not.
Yeah. That's why they have those fans on them. That's why you really need the fan. Huh? If it don't pop first, well, they are hot, yeah. Redundancy planning. To ensure business continuity is the use of redundancy planning, which involves building excess capacity in order to protect against failure. And when we're talking about this, there are a couple of things that we can do. Hot site, warm site, cold site. Hot site means that we actually have a mirror image of the data center running someplace else. Is that practical? I think for most businesses, no. And then a warm site, you got some equipment there, but you don't have it up and running. You don't have the communications and all that other stuff there. Cold site, you probably got a building with some water and maybe heat and air conditioning. Probably not even furniture in it. Basically, a big storage area that you can go into. Redundancy for servers, storage, networks, power, and even sites. When we talk about servers and storage, we're talking about levels of RAID. And the 3 levels of RAID, I think the only ones I'll talk about is a 0, 1, and 5. Maybe a RAID was a 0, 1, which is a stripe that's mirrored, or duplex, so that you have some speed and some redundancy. Sam's looking he wants striping because he's a gamer. He wants it to be fast. That's what striping does for you. If we want to have a copy of it, we're going to mirror it. If we think that not more than one hard drive is going to fail, we're going to have a RAID 5 because it has the ability to continue running and reproduce the data. It will slow down from the parity stripe. Server, crash of a single server that supports a critical application has significant impact. And we're going to have 2 servers that are operating on the same set of data. The thing that's always concerned me about this is, what if the storage unit fails? Then, regardless of what you've done, how many servers you have at the front end, it doesn't really matter. But what we're talking about here is that if the server fails, then we have clustering where it will fail over, that another server will pick up the load. 2 different types of clustering that we can use. One is a dedicated do-nothing server, so that if the first one fails, it comes online and takes over. The other one is kind of a share the load, so that if one server goes offline, the other ones pick up the slack and they start doing the work of the server that's offline so it can come back online. Single point of failure is the loss of the entire entity. We've experienced that. Single point of failure, if I go plug the wire out of the switch, unplug the wire from the switch, it goes out of the room. Single point of failure. Router, probably going to be a single point of failure. Firewall may be a single point of failure. That's why you need to kind of have the backups of those. If you have a Cisco, have your configuration file. You get a new device, upload your configuration file, you're back in business. So there are a number of single points of failure. Switch is a single point of failure in here. Does it have to be? Could we have multiple physical paths? A loop. That's what spanning tree is about. And then if one of them goes down, spanning tree says, I don't have that hello message from this other guy. Let's recalculate what we can do so that it will redirect the traffic. Servers, a server cluster, which we talked about, asymmetric and symmetric. And asymmetric is a standby server that is only to take over for another server in the event of failure. The do-nothing server, just sitting there, loafing, doing nothing until the first one fails. Kind of like the third-string quarterback, isn't it? What do? They got the clipboard, right? Or the backup quarterback, what does he do? He's got the clipboard. Unless the first guy goes down. Then he's supposed to be ready to go. That's what these things do. Symmetric server, every server performs useful work, but you have some excess capacity in each one so that if one of them fails, then the other ones can pick up the load of the failed server. Storage, mean time between failure, and this is kind of an interesting thing to read. The average or the mean time until a component fails cannot be repaired and must be replaced. Calculating the mean time between failure involves taking the total time measured divided by the total number of failures observed. So how long is it going to take for a hard drive to fail? And I don't know, and if you read the whole thing, it says, hey, you really can't tell, but the average is going to be this. So if you have this many servers in their problem, if you have this many servers, and this is the mean time between failures of the hard drives, then you need 58 hard drives in order to go for 2 years or 3 years or whatever their calculation was before.
Why did power supplies back then have an MTBF?
Yes. A lot of things have an MTBF, mean time between failures. Does that mean that yours is going to last that long? No. Not at all. Fault tolerance, the ability to endure failures, and again, we're back to RAID for these things. Redundant array of independent, and if you read some really old literature, you'll see it as inexpensive disks. Multiple hard disks to increase the reliability. We've been through these in Windows and probably in other courses. RAID 0 is a striped array, no fault tolerance. This has more rapid read-write response because it does multiple reads and writes at the same time. This is the one we're going to give Sam for his games because the read and write is going to be faster. But if one of the disks in the RAID fails, then you lose all of the data. There is no data redundancy in RAID 0, so why is it a RAID? I don't know. But there is no data redundancy. RAID 1 is mirroring and duplexing. The only difference between them is how many controllers that you have. If we have 2 controllers, we have duplexing, so that if we lose one communication channel, we have a completely separate communication channel for the data. Mirroring, both disks use the same controller, so that if we lose that communication channel, the controller goes out, then we lose both disks. What the mirroring presumes is that the disk is going to fail and not the controller. RAID 5 is independent disks with distributed parity. Some parity is written on each disk. What the parity stripe does is allows the system, the RAID, to recreate the data if one disk fails. In RAID, whatever the formula is, you lose 1 disk's worth of storage. You have to have at least 3 disks. So if we have 3 disks, we lose 1/3 of the storage. If we have 5 disks, we lose 1/5 of the storage. 10 disks, 1/10 of the storage. You lose 1 disk's worth of storage for parity storage. RAID 0.1, high data transfer. What this is a RAID 1, a striped disk that's mirrored or duplexed. That gives you pretty good redundancy, and a lot of the servers nowadays come with this RAID built onto the motherboard, that RAID capability built onto the motherboard. RAID controller, this is the RAID 0, ABC, and the RAID 0, we're writing simultaneously to 4 disks, different parts of the disks. And then this one down here, the RAID 1, which is the mirror. A is mirrored to A, E is mirrored to E. These are two separate mirrors, so that we have a copy. In this one, we lose 50% of our storage because we have to have a copy of everything. In these things, do the disks have to be the same size? The disks don't have to be the same size, the partitions do. So your stripe or your mirror can only be as big as the smallest partition that you're using on any single drive. And this one's got the A's, splitting it up, A0, 1, 2, 3, B0, 1, 2, 3, and we have the parity that's distributed across the different disks. This one's the parity, the 0 parity stripe, the 1 parity stripe, and on down. And then the RAID 0, 1, we have striping in each of these things, which is then mirrored so that we have two different stripes. It's going to speed up the system. Mirroring is probably going to reduce the write speed but increase the read speed. RAID 5 is not notoriously fast, but the newer technologies probably not going to notice a whole lot of difference in them. Whether you have a hardware or software RAID will depend on where the operating system can be stored. Windows always says you can't store the operating system on a RAID. You can't store the operating system on a software RAID. You can store the operating system on a hardware RAID. You may or may not want to do that because they are a little more processing, maybe a little bit slower. Operating system probably may want to put on a mirror so that if one disk dies, you can keep running with it. All you have to do then is go and change where the start is in the startup files. Either that or just to change the physical location of it. Networks, redundant networks, waits in the background during normal operations, use the replication scheme to keep a copy alive of network information current. And this would be kind of a big deal, would be a big deal, but if you ever look at any of the Cisco stuff, they have all of the redundancy set up in their 3-level networking model. So that we would have, even in switches, we'd have multiple paths so that if one switch went down, we would have the ability to get someplace else. In a redundant network, some organizations contract with more than one ISP for remote connectivity. If you need that, if your business does that, let's say that we had Cox and Verizon, and Cox went down. If Cox went down, then we would then be able to switch to the Verizon connection. Power UPSs, probably those have been beaten to death, haven't they? Offline and online UPSs. What is the difference between these two? And did they ask that on the test, offline and online UPSs? No. Online's like a conditioner. It's continuously charging and well, it's kind of like a laptop, isn't it? If the battery's in, what does the laptop do? As far as I can tell, the power goes to charge the battery, and then the laptop runs off the battery. So that's what an online is. Online, inline. Think of online as inline. Offline UPS is the ones that we have that in a fraction of a second, if the power goes off, they switch on. The battery stays charged, but they don't provide the power. So you don't get any power conditioning from an offline UPS, whereas you can get power conditioning from an online UPS. Oh yeah, and they can communicate with the server, should communicate with the server, so if the power goes off, these things are not intended to stay on for hours at a time. They're designed to stay on for minutes at a time to do an orderly shutdown of the server. And they can actually be programmed to start that shutdown process. Modify users to save it and get offline because we're about to go down. Prevent new users from logging on, disconnect the users, and shut down the server. That's what we should have these things set up to do so that we preserve the data. Crashing may or may not honestly cause you to lose data. Windows, the newer versions of Windows, the 2003 and the 2008, are pretty resilient on that because we've experienced that a couple of times. It may take some time to get it back online. It may have to go back and rebuild. The last time we had this stuff crash, one of the domain controllers had to go back and rebuild its entire database. It took a while, several hours for it to get back online, but it did get back online. There's still a recommended path. The recommended path is through the orderly shutdown to where it stops the services. The operating system stops the services and does an orderly, let's keep all this stuff that we want. Site redundancy, hot site. Commercial disaster recovery services probably going to run these, allows the businesses to continue computer network operations, and this is a matter of minutes or hours, just as long as it takes you to get to the new site, because this will have one of everything at each site. You know, same servers, same workstations, same phones, same data, same everything. Going to be expensive in order to maintain that. A cold site, office space, but the customer's got to provide and install the equipment needed to continue operations. So you've scoped out some office space. Probably going to have power, maybe not the power that you need exactly. Going to have water, the basic structure. And then a warm site has the equipment installed but doesn't have an active internet, telecommunications facilities, doesn't have the current backups of data. We always talk about backups. I want to make my editorial comment here on backups. Really cool. We back up all this data. Let's say that we've got, oh, I don't know, 2 or 3 terabytes of data backed up. Anybody ever try to restore that much data? You know how long it takes to restore that much data? How much of the time does it take to restore it?
I got a terabyte on in
About 45 minutes? Wow, yours is much faster than mine because I did a couple 100 gig and it took about 6 hours.
When I restored the terabyte I have, was a database. I finished the Twilight Zone marathon waiting on it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes some time to do this. So when we talk about backup and restore, yeah, backups are really cool. Off-site backups because you actually do have the data, but you're not going to restore a lot of data in 20 minutes. Replicated data is going to be there, and that's kind of like back to the hot site, so that as a change is made, it's immediately replicated to the new location. That way you have what you need when you need it. Hopefully you don't need it. Disaster recovery, for restoring the process, for restoring the IT operations. And in this, and one of the objectives I know is to do, and we're not going to do an exercise where we restore the data, but you really need to walk through these things. Where is the data? Where am I going to restore it? Who's going to restore it? Where are we going to restore it to? And these things need to all be written down because in a crisis situation is not the time when you think the clearest. Have you forgotten something? That's where the planning and the practicing, actually doing the exercises, comes in. The company may not let you do as in-depth of an exercise as you want, but you need to do what you can in these things. Planning, disaster recovery plan. This is really what you guys were doing in the project. What do we need to do for a disaster recovery plan? Comprehensive in its scope is intended to be a detailed document that is updated regularly as equipment changes, as people change, who's responsible for what. This is one of the things that I think we tend to not do really well, is we write this really, really cool document and then we're done, never to be visited again. These things and all of these recovery documents need to be checked occasionally. Do they still work? That may or may not be the case. Unit 1, let's say the disaster, and these are just the units, chapters, whatever, the purpose and scope of the recovery team, preparing for disaster, emergency responses, restoration procedures. And one of the points that they make in this book, and it's a good point, is in Katrina, many of those companies, most of those companies, all those companies found out how ill-prepared they really were, not just from not having the data, but telephones didn't work. There was no transportation. Couldn't find the people. Couldn't find the people that you needed to actually, once you had the data and the coal site back up, who's going to now do the restoration? What kind of planning goes on for that? And if you really do an extensive plan for a disaster that you can only imagine. And very few people had really thought that one through. Not exactly true. We were in New Orleans for a basketball tournament for a week, and the whole week we were there, and this was probably 8 years before Katrina, was what happens if the Cat 5 hurricane hits, what's going to happen, and everything that whoever was doing the series wrote did happen. Pumps went down, city got flooded, can't get the water out, on and on and on and on and on. So what can happen? And you can't do these on your own. You have to have other people help you with these things. What can happen? What would happen here? We could have a fire, hurricane, like a hurricane here. Well, we have had some hurricanes come this far inland. Yeah. Flooding is probably a more likely thing around here. Flat roof. What's the hazard of a flat roof? See that happening in New England right now, don't you? Yeah, and how many of them have fallen in? I keep seeing reports of it, and now in the news you see people shoveling the roofs off. There was a fire station or something that the roof fell in one.
They might not want to get up there.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. Yeah, you got a little extra weight, you may be going with the snow, huh? That's true. I tell you what, well, the Super Bowl needed a disaster recovery plan, didn't they, or a disaster preparation plan or whatever? Because they had never anticipated it was going to snow in Dallas. And the ice would fall off and hit people. Yeah. I mean, you know what their response was? No, they raised the heat. You can't get up on that thing. Would you go up on that thing? Yeah, I know, but I know that's what they said. What they said they did was raise the temperature so that it would melt it.
They showed the video of people up on the roof.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm not going up there.
I ain't stupid.
Yeah. Communications room, and they've got these things, a sample excerpt. One of the things, media communications, what's in the media communications room, what are you going to have? You're going to have a television, a radio, one standard radio, one police radio, one citizens band radio, a DVD player. When you get into what do you really need for effective disaster recovery, how big is the disaster that you're planning on? And you really need to plan for a disaster. Most people didn't. I mean, and how many times does it happen? How many times has there been a Katrina? I mean, that is the biggest one, the biggest damage. Oh, they do that a lot. Used to be. I remember when I was much younger, Mississippi Valley flooded every year. Mississippi River flooded every year. If you're at a river, what's the probability of flood? How are your floodplains? Those kinds of things. What's going to happen? The more likely flood story, though, is one of these sprinkler pipes ruptures. Or in your house, a pipe ruptures, a second floor pipe or a third floor pipe, and then floods the rest of the house. I had that happen too. Frozen pipe, and it's a mess. It's a mess. Exercise. Try out the plan. Does the plan work? The disaster exercises. How much can you do? That's going to be a function of management. They're probably not going to let you shut the business down and go to the hot site if you have a hot site, but that's really what you should do. Hey, you came to work this morning and there's nothing here. Now what? I mean, that's the way you would really do a true exercise, isn't it? Not that a hard drive failed. Those are pretty easy. Painful sometimes, but I mean, that either is there or isn't. Well, and back to that, I mean, something even more basic. What if one of these trucks out here runs through the knock? How much damage would that do if it comes through a wall? Because it's on the outside wall. Could that happen? We hope it doesn't, but any of those things are possibilities. Data backups. I think you guys covered that one pretty well. The archive bit, grandfather, and the disk of types, and you can look at those. Full backup, differential, incremental. Copy is one that they've kind of thrown in. This is kind of a Microsoft term. All that is copying files. Really great term, right? Copy backup. Copy paste. That's what a copy backup is. Doesn't clear and what clears the archive bit and what doesn't. The full and the incremental clears the backup, clears the archive bit, which means that incrementals are going to be quicker to make, take less time to make, but much longer to restore because you have to restore each of them individually. Differentials are going to be slower the farther they get away from the full backup. They're going to be slower to make, but much quicker to restore because you only have to restore the full and then the last differential. This talks about recovery point object, the maximum length of time that an organization can tolerate between backups. What this really says is how frequently do you back up? Do you back up once a day, every 6 hours, every 2 hours, every 20 minutes? How old can the data be? And recovery time is the amount of time it takes you to recover the data. We kind of talked about that. How long can it be between them, and then how long is it going to take you to get it back? An alternative to using tape, and one of the things that they talk about, disk to disk. Disks are still kind of fragile. They really are fragile. The other thing is disk to tape, where we back up to disk, and then since we don't want to take the time on the production server, we back the production server up to a disk set and then back the disk set up to tape. Kind of a long way, but it then puts it on removable media that can be stored off-site. Continuous data protection, constantly updating. These, they say, are relatively expensive. Although I think there's some replication software that you can get that makes that not as expensive. You got to have something someplace else, obviously, in order for that to work. We do replication, but we only do replication once a day. So our tolerance is 24 hours, basically. Each of these things, how quick is it? And I think that for you guys, hopefully this is going to be kind of intuitive. The cost may not be. Tape's low, disk to disk moderate, disk to tape moderate, and then continuous data protection is going to be high. Organizations that can't afford downtime, if we're going to do we're going to lose $1.8 million, $1.2 million an hour, we're probably going to have continuous. That's not going to be that expensive.
I believe the tape is low cost.
Yeah, tape really doesn't cost that, and it's very reusable. The tape machines are not all that cheap, I don't think, but it's very portable. It can go off-site easily.
Sometimes we pull stuff out of the work and says it's going to take some time to pull from the tape.
Yeah, I mean, they're not quick. They're not quick. They're not quick because it's serial. You've got to go to the location to find it when you're using the tape. Whereas if you're using disk, it's going to be a random access. Tape is, I think the reason people use tape is because you can put a lot of data on it. I think one of the things in there, so you can put 800 gig on a tape. That's a lot of storage on a piece of tape. Huh? That's a lot of data. So but you can put a lot of data on a disk also. The problem with disks is they tend to fail more frequently, and if the disk fails, you're done.
I saw what's strange about the tape was the tension on the tape.
The tension on the tape, yeah, and they stretch. They do have to be replaced. And most of the tape backup units will check the tape as you put it in, say it's no good, it's stretched, it's whatever else. And then you may have to recalibrate it to make it back. Oh, sure. You have to. Incident response procedures, whatever that too fast, include the use of forensics, science, and forensics, also known as forensic science. Forensics is basically making a true image of whatever is there, including memory, before you move on, before you destroy what's there. Can attempt to retrieve information, even if it's been altered or erased, and you know that even if it's been erased, unless they've gone through the process to really make it go away, it can be recovered. There are a number of tools out there. Get Back is the one that I bought a long time ago, and it's pretty effective. Get data back. What these things do is actually read the hard drive platters, read the data on the hard drive. To limit damage and loss and control of data, so we do these things. What you've got to do with these things is make a true image of the disk, because if something happens, you don't want to do anything to the actual evidence, the disk itself. You make a copy and then do all your testing on the copy. Because if you destroy anything, do anything to the disk itself, then obviously it's gone. A lot of digital evidence increased scrutiny by the legal profession, because they're going to check to see if you have a chain of custody, what happened, is it there, or they'll try to get the evidence thrown out, the defense will. Higher level computer skills by criminals, all of these things, what we're going to do with these things. So the responding, secure the scene, take pictures, photographs, and one of the things that they say about photographs before you touch anything is you may not want to use digital photographs because they can be manipulated easily. If you use film, then that's the picture. Of course, if you make a digital image out of it, then you can still manipulate it. But digital pictures, as we know, can be manipulated. Physical surroundings should be clearly documented, what's going on. Pictures are a great way to document these things. And I'll tell you from experience, when we were in overhaul on a ship, I was in the propulsion plant. We had these huge valves. We're talking 12-inch valves. And they come back to put these things in after they've taken them out and reworked them into the steam lines. It's like, I forgot how that went. Pictures are a great way to help you out. Yeah. Same thing when you start. I do that with the serpentine belts. I always get them wrong. If you take a picture, though, it's there.
They have a little nice little handy diagram that's on the
Yeah, that never works out for me. I know. Preserve the evidence, capture any volatile data. The volatile data are going to be the data that's in memory. Mirror image backups to replicate all the sectors of it. Chain of custody, once you find that the chain of custody of the evidence, somebody has to sign every time that they take the evidence. The chain of custody is something that when you go to court they're going to want to know about. It's just like in drug cases, chain of custody. Could the evidence have been contaminated? Who had control of it? Every minute. All right. Examine the evidence, creates the image, and then we're going to look at the image using the tools that are available. The mirrored image. Yeah. The original one you preserve. Once you've captured all of the information, captured the hard drive, captured the memory, all of the other stuff that's available to be captured on the machine, then you're going to shut it down, wrap it up, lock it up, and maintain a chain of custody. And then you're going to do all of your work on the copies. I'm going to go through these. This is getting a little long this morning, but RAM slack and drive slack, this is just basically what's left over. Remember that back into the tables that in Windows we may take part of a sector or part of a cluster. If you do that and you overwrite something, then the old information may be there, and that's what slack is. It's just kind of what's left over from the previous file. And I got a couple of pictures here for that. This is the new file. The original file, thank you for your interest in Miami Beach Fun, da-da-da-da-da-da. The file stored with RAM slack, thank you for your interest. This was what's left over from the old file, so there is some old information available. And this happens in both RAM and in disks. Well, you've seen disks. You've recovered disks, unformat or undelete programs to do that. New file save with slack. This is the same thing. This is the disk. Same for each one, what's left over from the old files. Do files actually go away when we delete them? Not, huh? Depends on how you delete them. What if we just hit delete? No. Mm-hmm. If you just want to get rid of the drive, you can burn it, you can magnetize it, or do a low-level format with a magnet, right?
If it's written over, that's probably.
There's an awful lot of stuff that stays there if you'll get one of these recovery disks and delete some stuff and undelete some stuff. I bought a laptop one time from Overstock, and I just decided to see what was there. Well, their database still was there. And it had new OS and all that other stuff on it, but there was parts of, at least, and the disk may have been part of I don't know what it was a part of, but it did have, obviously, database information still on the disk.
Doesn't that happen to some of the government hardware that they sell?
It happens a lot of that happened to Roanoke City Schools, didn't it? Roanoke City Schools? Yeah, copy machines, that's a good one. That's one you don't think about. These copy machines have hard drives in them.
How much do they hold on average?
Oh, they're about, I know, they're pretty big, 80, 90, 100 gig. Yeah, because some of the bigger ones are designed to collate books. Yeah, they can be big. They can be small, but they can be pretty big. This one up here, this one up here has failed a couple of times. I don't remember what size it was, but it's bigger than 100 meg. So, disaster recovery, something that we all don't like to do. What? Something that we all don't like to do, don't want to think about, probably aren't going to need it, but when you do need it, if you don't have it, you might as well start looking for a job. This is honestly, the thankless part of what goes on. Except that Chris alluded to that somebody deleted a file that they didn't really want to. You can go to the backup. It takes some time to get there, but you can go to the backup and get that file back. If you're replicating, will we be able to get that file back? Because when you delete it, deletes in both locations. Then we'd have to go back to one of the other recovery options, one of the undelete sort of things. Questions? Going once, going twice. Everybody found tools now? What we're going to do the rest of the day is